The toolmaker's weapon. How an aircraft gun built in a tent killed 20 on Iwo Jima's first morning. The weapon had no name, yet when Corporal Tony Stein first fired it into the humid darkness of a Bougainville night, the sound like tearing canvas amplified 100-fold, a mechanical scream that shredded the jungle quiet and sent tracer rounds arcing through the black cathedral of trees at 1,200 rounds per minute. The M2 Browning aircraft machine gun, designed to be mounted in the wings of Navy fighters at 30,000 feet, now sat cradled in Stein's arms like an oversized infant, its receiver married awkwardly to the wooden stock of an M1 Garand rifle, its barrel braced by a bipod cannibalized from a Browning automatic rifle. The union of these three weapons, one from the sky, two from the earth, created something that belonged to neither realm, a mechanical chimera born of necessity and a toolmaker's hands, a gun that would later be called the Stinger, but which at that moment in late 1943 was simply Tony's solution to a problem that kept killing Marines. The problem was this: the standard infantry weapons could not deliver enough firepower fast enough to suppress Japanese pillboxes before they murdered entire squads. The M1 Garand, magnificent though it was, fired 8 rounds before requiring reload. The BAR, the squad's automatic weapon, managed 20 rounds per magazine at a rate of fire that seemed leisurely compared to what the Japanese brought to bear. The .30 caliber M1919 machine gun, the Marines' primary suppression tool, required a 2-man crew and weighed 41 pounds without its tripod, making it slow to reposition, cumbersome in jungle terrain, and vulnerable during the critical seconds of an assault when speed meant survival. What Stein needed, what every Marine advancing through the meat grinder of the Pacific Island campaigns needed, was concentrated, mobile, overwhelming firepower that one man could carry and deploy in the time it took to draw breath. So he built it himself. Tony Stein had been born to build things. September 30th, 1921, in Dayton, Ohio, the American heartland where the Wright brothers had taught humanity to fly 2 decades earlier, where immigrants like his parents, Steve and Rose, who had fled the collapsing Austro-Hungarian Empire from their village of Erdevik, arrived carrying little but the capacity for labor and the conviction that America rewarded skill with survival. The Steins were not wealthy. The Depression, which descended on Dayton like fog off the Miami River, saw to that. But Tony had hands that understood metal, eyes that could visualize how parts fit together, and a mind that solved mechanical problems the way some men solve crossword puzzles. By the time he graduated from Kaiser High School, he was already working as a toolmaker, a trade that in 1930s America represented something close to industrial artistry, the ability to fabricate precision components, to grind cutting tools, to turn raw stock into functional machinery with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. A toolmaker was part engineer, part craftsman, part translator between the language of blueprints and the language of steel. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Tony Stein was 20 years old, unmarried, and draft eligible. He enlisted 8 days before his 21st birthday, walking into the Marine Corps recruitment office in Dayton on September 22, 1942, because he had heard that Marines were the first ones sent into battle, and he wanted to defend his country at the sharp end of the spear. The recruiter, accustomed to farm boys and factory workers who knew how to take orders but little else, discovered in Stein something unusual, a young man who could disassemble, diagnose, and repair nearly any mechanical device the Corps possessed, a skill set that would prove far more valuable than anyone initially understood. The Marine Corps made Stein a Paramarine. The Paramarines were an experimental unit, the Corps' attempt to match the airborne capabilities of the Army's paratroopers, and they represented the pinnacle of Marine infantry training. The men underwent standard boot camp at Parris Island, then additional parachute training, weapons training, and conditioning that pushed physical limits past what conventional infantry endured. They were meant to be dropped behind enemy lines, to seize objectives before amphibious forces arrived, to operate independently in hostile territory with nothing but what they carried. The experiment would eventually be disbanded in 1944. The Marines concluded that every Marine should be elite, that creating a separate elite unit was redundant. But while they existed, the Paramarines attracted men like Stein, motivated, skilled, willing to volunteer for something harder than the already hard standard. Stein deployed to the South Pacific with Headquarters Company, 3rd Parachute Battalion, 1st Parachute Regiment, 3rd Marine Division. He fought on Vela La Vela in the Solomon Islands, where he killed 5 Japanese snipers in a single day, demonstrating marksmanship that bordered on the supernatural. He fought on Bougainville, where the jungle was so dense that visibility extended perhaps 20 yards in any direction, where the Japanese infiltrated American lines at night, like water seeping through sandbags, where conventional tactics failed because you could not see the enemy until he was already among you. It was on Bougainville that Stein's engineering mind began working on the firepower problem. The crashed Navy fighter sat in a clearing not far from the Marine perimeter, its fuselage crumpled, its wings torn, its pilot long since evacuated or buried. But its guns remained intact, 2.30 caliber and /M2 Browning machine guns, air-cooled weapons designed to fire through propeller arcs, each capable of cycling 1,200 rounds per minute. Aircraft guns fired faster than ground guns because pilots needed to damage enemies during the brief seconds when targeting solutions aligned, when one aircraft crossed another's trajectory, and the window for killing measured in heartbeats. 1,200 rounds per minute meant 20 bullets per second, a rate of fire that could saw through metal, shred canvas, turn human beings into red mist. Stein looked at those guns and saw possibility. Working with another Paramarine, Private First Class Mel J. Grevich, Stein stripped one of the M2s from the wrecked fighter. The gun weighed approximately 23 pounds, significantly lighter than the M1919, but still too heavy and awkwardly balanced to be fired from the shoulder without modification. Stein needed a stock, something to brace against his body, to absorb recoil, to allow aiming. He found a broken M1 Garand rifle, removed its walnut stock, and adapted it to fit the M2's receiver, drilling new holes, fabricating custom fittings, using whatever tools were available in a jungle maintenance tent. The Garand stock was shorter than ideal, but it worked. Next came the sighting system. Stein mounted the rear sight from a Browning automatic rifle, giving him a familiar reference point for aiming. Finally, he attached a bar bipod to the muzzle, providing stability when firing from the prone position. The result was a weapon approximately 40 inches long, weighing around 25 pounds fully loaded, capable of firing standard .30-06 ammunition at a rate 4 times faster than the bar. Stein test-fired it in November 1943, and the results must have pleased him immensely. The gun delivered devastating firepower at ranges up to 300 yards. Its high rate of fire meant that even brief bursts placed multiple rounds on target, increasing hit probability against moving enemies or partially concealed positions. Its relatively light weight, compared to the M1919, meant Stein could carry it himself, could run with it, could deploy it in seconds rather than minutes. The bipod provided accuracy. The Garand stock made it shoulder-able. The aircraft ammunition system meant belt-fed sustained fire as long as ammunition lasted. Stein called it the Stinger. The name fit. The weapon looked strange, a Frankenstein assemblage of parts that no military manual described, but it stung like 10 men shooting at once. Other Paramarines saw what Stein had created and wanted their own. Grevich and others built 5 more Stingers from additional wrecked aircraft, creating a tiny arsenal of handmade machine guns that existed nowhere in the table of organization and equipment. The Marine Corps, pragmatic as always, did not object. If a corporal with a toolmaker's background wanted to build custom weapons that killed Japanese more efficiently, the Marine Corps was content to let innovation proceed. There would be no official designation, no mass production, no formal integration into doctrine. The Stinger would remain a field expedient, a local solution to a local problem. 6 guns built in jungle tents by men who understood that survival rewarded ingenuity. When the Paramarines disbanded in late 1944, Stein returned to Camp Pendleton, California, where he was promoted to corporal and assigned to Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines, 5th Marine Division. He brought the Stinger with him. His new unit was training for something large, something that the scuttlebutt said would be worse than Tarawa, worse than Peleliu, worse than any island assault yet attempted. The target's name remained classified, but the training intensity suggested a nightmare. The 28th Marines practiced amphibious landings until the movements became autonomous. They rehearsed bunker assaults with flamethrowers, satchel charges, and grenades. They studied maps of volcanic terrain, learned to navigate through loose sand that swallowed boots to the ankle, prepared for an enemy that would be dug in so deeply that only total annihilation would dislodge them. The target was Iwo Jima. February 19, 1945. The island measured approximately 8 square miles. A misshapen pork chop of volcanic rock and black sand dominated at its southern end by Mount Suribachi, a 556-foot extinct volcano that provided the Japanese with observation over every approach. The island's strategic value was simple. Iwo Jima sat equidistant between the Mariana Islands, where American B-29 superfortresses were based, and Tokyo, 760 miles to the north. B-29s flying to bomb Japan needed fighter escorts, but conventional fighters lacked the range. If America could seize Iwo Jima and build fighter bases there, P-51 Mustangs could escort the bombers all the way to the Japanese home islands. Additionally, damaged B-29s returning from raids needed emergency landing sites. Iwo Jima would provide that. The island was worth dying for. The Japanese understood this, and they prepared accordingly. Lieutenant General Tadamaki Kurabayashi commanded Iwo Jima's defense. A brilliant, pragmatic officer who had studied in America and understood American firepower, Kurabayashi abandoned the traditional Japanese strategy of defending the beaches. Previous island campaigns had seen Japanese defenders slaughtered by naval bombardment and close air support before American troops even landed. Kurabayashi would not repeat that mistake. Instead, he ordered his 21,000 soldiers to dig in, to construct an underground fortress of tunnels, bunkers, artillery casemates, and pillboxes so extensive that the entire garrison could live and fight beneath the surface. He positioned interlocking fields of fire so that every American advance would be swept by crossfire from multiple directions. He sighted artillery and mortars in reverse-slope positions where naval gunfire could not reach them. He ordered his men to fight to the death, to sell each yard of volcanic rock at the highest possible price in American blood. The naval bombardment preceding the invasion lasted 3 days, the longest pre-invasion bombardment of any Pacific operation. Battleships and cruisers hurled thousands of tons of high-explosive shells onto the island, turning the landscape into a moonscape of overlapping craters. Aircraft dropped napalm and bombs. The Navy was confident they had destroyed most defensive positions. They were catastrophically wrong. Kurabayashi's underground fortress absorbed the bombardment like a sponge, and when the shelling stopped, his soldiers emerged from tunnels and prepared to meet the assault. February 19, 1945, dawn. The sky above Iwo Jima resembled a Renaissance painting of Judgment Day, vast and metallic, lit from below by the orange glow of the naval guns still firing, the horizon lost in smoke and cordite haze. Corporal Tony Stein sat in the well of an LVT, a landing vehicle tracked, the armored amphibious tractor that would carry him from ship to shore, surrounded by 30 other Marines from Company A, all of them silent or praying or vomiting from fear and seasickness. Stein cradled the Stinger across his lap, its weight familiar now, its mechanisms as known to his hands as his own fingers. He carried 800 rounds of .30-06 ammunition in belt form, draped over his shoulders and stuffed into improvised pouches. He wore his M1 helmet. His feet were shod in standard-issue boondockers. He had no idea that within hours, he would discard both helmet and shoes in favor of speed. The first wave hit the beach at 0900 hours. Stein's LVT was among them. The vehicle's treads churned through the surf, found purchase on the volcanic sand, and ground up the beach toward the first terrace. The sand was unlike anything the Marines had encountered. Loose, deep, volcanic ash mixed with coarse pumice that gave way underfoot like trying to run up a sand dune. Each step sank 6 inches. Each movement required twice the normal effort. The Japanese, as Kurabayashi had planned, held their fire during the initial landing, allowing the first waves to move inland and become congested before opening up. When the fire came, it came from everywhere at once. Machine guns from positions on Suribachi to the left, mortars from reverse slope emplacements inland, artillery from the Motoyama Plateau to the north. Stein's platoon, attempting to move toward their first objective, Airfield No. 1, which lay 400 yards inland, found themselves pinned on the second terrace by interlocking fire from pillboxes that the naval bombardment had failed to destroy. Marines dropped, hit before they could locate the enemy. Others went to ground in shell craters, unable to advance, unable to effectively return fire against invisible guns firing from concrete apertures 20 feet underground. Stein made a decision. He stood up. Standing upright on Iwo Jima during the first hour of the invasion was suicidal. Japanese gunners had pre-registered every yard of terrain, had coordinates for every approach, could call down mortar fire on any exposed target within seconds. But Stein understood something fundamental about suppression. To neutralize enemy fire, you first had to locate it. And to locate it, someone had to draw it. By exposing himself to the enemy's view, he became a target. And in becoming a target, he revealed the Japanese positions. Machine gun fire converged on him. Stein tracked the muzzle flashes, identified 3 pillboxes in a rough triangle formation, dropped prone, swung the Stinger onto its bipod, and opened fire. The Stinger's rate of fire produced a sound unlike any standard infantry weapon. A continuous roar, a buzzsaw cutting through metal, 20 rounds per second walking across the concrete face of the nearest pillbox. Stein fired in short bursts, conserving ammunition but maintaining sustained pressure, placing rounds into the firing ports until either the gun was destroyed or the crew killed. The first pillbox went silent. He traversed to the second, repeated the procedure, watched his tracers ricochet off concrete and disappear into the aperture. The second pillbox ceased fire. The third took longer. Its angle was worse, his line of sight partially obstructed, but after 30 seconds of sustained fire, it too fell silent. Stein's platoon surged forward, crossed the exposed ground that had been killing them, and reached cover behind a low ridge. But forward was only more of the same. More pillboxes, more interlocking fire, more Marines dying in the volcanic sand. Stein repeated his tactic: stand, draw fire, locate the guns, suppress them, allow the platoon to advance. He killed 2 more pillboxes, then 3, then 4. By noon, he had personally neutralized or destroyed at least 20 Japanese positions using nothing but the Stinger and his willingness to serve as bait. But ammunition was finite, and the Stinger consumed it voraciously. 1,200 rounds per minute meant Stein's 800 rounds lasted approximately 40 seconds of sustained fire. He burned through his initial load within the first hour. The nearest resupply was back on the beach, 400 yards to the rear, across the same killing ground his platoon had just crossed. So Stein ran back. He did not walk, did not seek cover, did not wait for support. He simply started running toward the beach, and as he ran, he realized that his helmet and shoes were slowing him down. The M1 helmet weighed approximately 3 pounds, and while that seemed trivial, at a full sprint through volcanic ash that swallowed each step, every ounce mattered. Stein ripped the helmet off and threw it aside. His boondockers, filling with sand, felt like anchors dragging at each stride. He kicked them off and continued in socks, then barefoot when the socks tore. The volcanic ash was hot, not scalding, but uncomfortably warm. But speed mattered more than comfort, and Stein sprinted the 400 yards to the beach supply dump, grabbed as many ammunition belts as he could carry, slung them over his shoulders like bandoliers, and started back toward his platoon. On the way back, he saw a wounded Marine lying exposed between the terraces, trying to drag himself toward cover with one functional arm. Stein detoured, grabbed the Marine under the shoulders, and hauled him along despite the additional weight, despite the ammunition already burdening him, despite the Japanese fire still sweeping the beach. He delivered the wounded Marine to an aid station, dropped off the ammunition with his platoon, and immediately turned around to do it again. 8 times. Tony Stein made 8 trips from his platoon's forward position back to the beach and return, each trip covering approximately 800 yards round trip. Each trip made while Japanese mortars and machine guns swept the terrain, each trip hauling ammunition forward and a wounded Marine backward. 6,400 yards total distance, roughly 3.6 miles, sprinted through volcanic ash under fire, while carrying 50 pounds of ammunition or 150 pounds of wounded Marine, completed across 4 hours on the afternoon of February 19, 1945. The Medal of Honor citation written later in the bureaucratic language of official military documents, would describe Stein's actions with words like conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, but those words could not capture the physical reality. The burning in his lungs after the third trip, the cramps in his legs after the fifth, the tunnel vision that came from pure oxygen debt after the seventh. The way his bare feet bled from a dozen small cuts where sharp volcanic rock had sliced through skin. The way his shoulders bore red welts where the ammunition belts had rubbed through his uniform shirt. The way his hands blistered from the Stinger's superheated barrel shroud until the blisters popped, and he simply ignored the pain because pain was irrelevant measured against what needed doing. Later in the day, despite exhaustion, Stein continued fighting. When a Japanese pillbox pinned down his entire platoon, he directed the fire of a Marine M3 half-track, an armored vehicle mounting a 75mm gun, onto the fortification until it was destroyed. When his own platoon needed to withdraw to the company position, he covered their retreat, standing exposed once again while firing the Stinger to keep Japanese heads down. Twice during the afternoon, Japanese bullets struck the Stinger itself, damaging the weapon but not destroying it. And both times Stein simply kept firing until the magazine emptied, then made hasty repairs before continuing. By nightfall on February 19th, the Marines had secured a narrow beachhead 4,000 yards wide and 700 yards deep. It was far short of the first day's objectives, and it had cost 3,500 casualties, dead, wounded, or missing. But they were ashore, and they held ground, and men like Tony Stein were the reason why. In a single day, Stein had killed at least 20 enemy soldiers in direct combat, had made it possible for his platoon to advance when they otherwise would have been destroyed, had saved at least 8 wounded Marines who would have died without evacuation, and had proven that a weapon built from aircraft parts in a jungle tent could change the course of a battle. The fighting would continue for another 34 days. On February 23rd, Marines from the 28th Regiment, Stein's regiment, would climb Mount Suribachi and raise an American flag on its summit, creating one of the most iconic images in American military history. Stein, wounded during the Suribachi assault, would be evacuated to a hospital ship. But when he learned that his regiment was taking heavy casualties in the assault on Hill 362A to the north, he left the ship against medical advice and returned to his unit. On March 1, 1945, while leading a 19-man patrol to reconnoiter a Japanese machine gun position that had Company A pinned down, Tony Stein was killed by a sniper. He was 23 years old. His Medal of Honor was presented to his widow on February 19, 1946, exactly 1 year after the day he had earned it. The ceremony took place in the office of Ohio Governor Frank Losh. Stein's body, initially buried in the 5th Division Cemetery on Iwo Jima, was returned to Dayton in 1948 and reinterred with full military honors in Calvary Cemetery on December 17, following funeral services at Our Lady of the Rosary Church. The city's only World War II Medal of Honor recipient had come home. The Stinger, that strange hybrid weapon that Tony Stein built from salvaged parts and his toolmaker's skill, did not survive the war in any official capacity. No examples exist in military museums. The 6 guns built by Stein and his fellow Paramarines likely ended up in the Pacific Ocean, discarded or lost when their users were killed, or perhaps destroyed in compliance with regulations that did not acknowledge their existence. But the weapon's impact echoes still. It demonstrated that unconventional thinking could produce tactical advantages, that a skilled craftsman with access to spare parts could build tools more effective than what standard supply chains provided, that necessity plus ingenuity equaled innovation. In 1972, the United States Navy commissioned USS Stein, FF 1065, a Knox-class frigate named in Tony's honor. The ship served for 25 years before being decommissioned in 1997. In 1989, the Marine Corps dedicated the Moving Target Simulator building at Camp Pendleton's 3rd Low-Altitude Air Defense Battalion Training Area to Corporal Tony Stein, ensuring that young Marines learning their craft would do so in a facility bearing the name of a man who understood that excellence in combat required not just bravery, but skill, creativity, and the willingness to build your own solutions when standard answers failed. The story of Tony Stein and his homemade machine gun illuminates something essential about American military history that often gets lost beneath the grand narratives of strategy and high command. The United States did not win the Pacific War solely through industrial might or numerical superiority, though both mattered immensely. America won because men like Stein, toolmakers, mechanics, farm boys who understood machines, factory workers who knew how things fit together, brought to war the same practical ingenuity that had built American industry in peacetime. They did not wait for perfect solutions from above. They improvised, adapted, built what they needed from what they had. The Stinger was not beautiful. It violated every principle of standardized logistics. It could not be mass-produced, could not be formally integrated into doctrine, could not be issued to every Marine who needed superior firepower. But on the morning of February 19, 1945, on a black sand beach under fire from an entrenched enemy, in the hands of a young man from Dayton who understood both metal and mortality, the Stinger worked. And for 8 wounded Marines who made it off that beach alive because someone carried them, for a platoon that advanced when they should have been destroyed, for 20 Japanese soldiers who died before they could kill more Americans, the Stinger's imperfections were entirely irrelevant. Tony Stein built a weapon to solve a problem. Then he used it, and himself, to save lives at the cost of his own. The Medal of Honor citation calls this gallantry. In Dayton, they might call it doing the job that needed doing. Either way, it was enough. In war, enough is often everything. The volcanic ash of Iwo Jima has long since settled, the pillboxes collapsed or buried, the blood washed away by 70 years of rain. But somewhere in the American story, in the part that celebrates not just courage but cleverness, not just sacrifice but skill, not just dying well but building better tools to live, Tony Stein and his Frankenstein gun remain, a testament to what happens when a free people arm themselves not just with weapons, but with the permission to think, to modify, to improve, and to solve problems that no manual anticipated. That, perhaps more than any single battle, is the weapon dictatorships could never match.